Good morning, everybody from Pennsylvania. Wanted to give you a short update on global empires. Tim and I worked all day yesterday on a 5-player game. When you're testing, you just kind of have to have some level of schizophrenia and kind of work through some issues and determine playability and balance and just how things are starting to shape up. And I wanted to share that with you. We're going to continue this today, and then tomorrow we're going to switch to a 2-player game regardless of how far we get in this. I think it's starting to shape up a certain way, but as I stated before, this is going to be generally speaking, a 5-player game. It is recommended with the 5 major powers of US, Britain, France, Germany, and Russia. So I'm going to talk through kind of phase 1 of a turn a little bit. Just like Global 36 and Global 14, not a lot to shed light on, except I want to talk about diplomacy and technology and units, because that's probably the biggest where things transition from a Global 14 map and units to Global 36 type of execution, and you see this incremental build through the war. So first, let's talk about one of the first things you do is, of course, you start at a peacetime income, and you have to roll to wartime income. The first 4 turns of the game are considered the prequel. We think that's about the right balance. Most of the nations are able to get up to wartime income by the 5th turn. Those that don't, definitely by the 6th turn, unless of course they're attacked and they immediately go to wartime income. The 2 that have the longest distance to go are Germany and Britain and the US, but in this sample game, the US got there almost immediately. You know how those dice can roll. So some variability there. Objectives. Talked about objectives. There are the victory cities, which to Global 14, you'll recognize that we added victory cities of Tokyo and Rome. Because those are major cities around the world, and we just wanted to have all the victory cities on there. And then each nation has 3 random victory objectives. You roll to see which one you'll pick, and they're very different for each country, but there of course will create conflict. In this game, the Germans' random objective is to take Paris, and so if you look at my map, which I specifically focused on Germany and France, the Germans are going hard after Paris. They've taken 3 territories. They had 4, trying to surround the city, trying to force Paris into a surrounded situation where they can attack it from all sides. And of course, the standard global war penalty for surrounded city, -1, will be very helpful for the Germans. Diplomacy. So you got those objectives. I forgot to mention there are 12 secret random objectives. All players will see if they get one of those random objectives. They're actually worth the majority of points, and more than one country can get the same objective. So in this case, the British, the French, and the US all have the same objectives of more technology than anyone else on the board. So far, the Americans are winning that race, but the French built and the British upgraded a factory to a major, and there's incremental technology. I'm sure some of you will recognize that from Global 14. There's only 10 technology treks, but there are 8 stages, and they are incremental. Maybe I'll show you a picture of that at a later date, a later update. But imagine going from your Global 14 infantry to your Global 36 infantry as an upgrade, and then adding things like special operations and mechanized infantry, then advanced mechanized infantry. That's all on the infantry track. So that's how the technology is going to work for all 10 technologies. Some of them are more, every stage 1 through 8 has got something in it. Others, you'll have some blank stages where you're moving up the track. And then diplomacy. So there are 4 minor powers with a reference sheet. Japan, Austria, Ottomans, and the Italians. They all start in a position favored towards one of the 4 major powers, player major powers. The U.S. doesn't have anyone slanted towards them. I figured with their isolationist kind of outlook in the early 20th century, as well as just a balance. I mean, so I also wanted to kind of spread those countries out. I didn't want the next door neighbor of a country to be its potential ally. So Austria is slanted towards the French, although it may make more sense for them to be Austria-Hungary to be slanted towards the Germans. You can just use your imagination. There's a rift between those nations, probably because of how AH was treated over time. And so, you know, they start now. That doesn't mean the Germans can't roll for Austria-Hungary. They could exert diplomatic influence and try and get them up their track. But ultimately, no nation can align more than one of those 4 minor powers that have a reference sheet. So that also helps maintain a bit of a balance. And then I want to point out the technology on my map as it evolved, kind of circling back to technology. If you look at my German forces, you see right there in Bavaria, and I'll point it out, you see an early bomber from Global 14 sitting right next to a medium bomber from Global 36, because that's how the technology is going. If you'll notice, and this is just my pieces, my black pieces are from Global 36, my gray pieces are from Global 14, and you can see that the Germans have upgraded their infantry. They've got medium bombers, they've got fighters, along with, you know, the Global 14 fighters. So they're both in the game right now. And of course, as obsolete units are being expended or destroyed in the game, replacing them with Global 36 units. You know, for example, if a dreadnought, I don't actually have this technology, the US does, but if a dreadnought would be destroyed, I'd replace it with a battleship if I had that technology. I wouldn't spend my time building dreadnoughts. Dreadnoughts are weaker in comparison, and so battleships are a better organization. And that's just an example of the technology and diplomacy. And other than that, the phase 1 mechanics are exactly the same as Global 14, Global 36. We're learning some things as we go along. We've added some technology. And giving an example, while we were playtesting, we looked at the map and we realized there are almost no airfields on this map. Well, that makes perfect sense. Global 14 is a World War I game, not a lot of airfields. The airfield mechanic wasn't necessary or useful for Global 14. So as you move up a step on the fighter track for global empires, you get to the point where you can build expeditionary airfields. They're inexpensive compared to just a full airfield, but you could build more than one airfield, but you'd have to pay per turn. But your expeditionary airfield is much cheaper. If you were going to build a second, third, fourth airfield on the same turn, you would have to spend more money on it. So You see an airfield that the Germans have put down in Bavaria also. So those are some examples of how this is turning out. It's kind of interesting to see how the objectives are kind of guiding the organizations. The British and the Germans are not even at war with each other. They have no overlap, and so they're ignoring each other. The Germans have their hands full with the French, the Russians, and the Austrians, and just they've had to politely ignore their secret objective for the moment. They're having to make a tough choice and just focusing on one objective at the moment, and we're halfway through the game, so there's still may be time. The last 4 turns of the game are a variable ending, so I have to keep that in mind as I pace myself towards my objectives, as the Germans. So those are how the mechanics of Global 14, Global 36 come together in phase 1 of the game, as you roll through your first turn, picking those objectives, and then making purchases, technology, diplomacy, and then you can see how the technology has changed over the course of half a game, and will probably continue to change. Looking over, I'm not going to pan on the Americans. The Americans have fleet carriers. You can start with light carriers from the Global 36 game actually come in 1 turn earlier than the fleet carriers. But Germany has already gotten to fleet carriers and is probably going to dominate the oceans, although they are at war with the British, and the British have a lot of dreadnoughts. We'll see how they fare without air cover, and I think that we know what history has to say about that. So the British are going to have to move out smartly on their technology and kind of hope for some favorable outcomes in clash with the U.S. Anyways, so hope you enjoyed this update, and let us know again if this concept is appealing to you. You'd like to see this on your map table. The biggest thing so far that you're probably going to be interested in purchasing will be a few units like special operations. And I'll talk through the units in a different video, but it's really going to be the player aids, that 10 tracks of technology, an updated IPP sheet, which I'll show some of those things again later, and the battle boards are obviously updated, very crowded too, but updated, and exciting times coming your way. More updates later this week. Happy holidays.